Okay, so what we're now going to look at is how HTML and CSS come together and how we actually style elements. So we'll take this as a fun example of learning how we implement a style sheet, how we save a style sheet, file extensions, and we'll actually build the button example that we've been seeing in the last couple of videos. So let's go ahead first of all. We've started with a completely blank page. We've got two files in my editor here. We've got index.html and global.css. Let's go ahead and get rid of these just so we can sort of start afresh. So an HTML file is obviously serving HTML content, or usually, and we are going to just basically mark up our page. So if you're familiar with HTML, you should see how this all comes together. So we'll go ahead and we'll use an HTML5 doc type. So that's just a doc type probably recommended to use now. We'll open and close an HTML element. Now I'm just going to stop there for a minute because it's important to understand elements from the point of CSS as well. So when we create an HTML element, we're creating something that we can technically target with CSS. So any element in CSS you can go ahead and target. With the exception of things like the title and meta tags, they're not really HTML elements, I guess. So they're more for a functional purpose. So the title will have a title in the browser, but the body, the HTML element, we can style these with CSS. So it's just good to know at this point. So let's go ahead and create the data in our head. So we just have a title here, and that is CSS, and we'll go ahead and we will do things properly. We'll go ahead and set our character set as well to UTF-8, just so characters are displayed properly. And we'll go ahead and skip linking in our style sheet for now, because I'm going to go ahead and create the body element. So again, the body element, like I said before, can be styled with CSS if we want to. There are cases where you need to do that, for example a global font or something like that, font sizing, background color to your page, anything like that really. So what we're now going to do is we're going to think about setting up our page in terms of applying CSS. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file. Now I'm not going to do anything in there at the moment. I'm going to save this. Now we want to keep all of our style sheets, which is basically the files that contain our CSS files, separately from our root directory. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new file called CSS, a new folder called CSS. Now this is going to contain all of our style sheets that we create. Now for the purpose of this series and this tutorial, we're just going to create one style sheet called global. Now what you might want to do is create separate style sheets for different things. So you might want to have a style sheet for specific pages that you only load into certain pages to style things, or you might just want to have one big one. But either way, it's useful to split them up and combine them on a sort of server level. But that's a little bit too advanced. So we're going to just talk about actually creating one style sheet and styling up elements. So I'm going to call this global.css, just meaning this contains all my global styles. So once I've saved that out, we're going to go ahead at actually styling the body of the page. But the first thing we want to do is go ahead and create an element on the page with some text in, so we can go ahead and create a font for our page. So we're going to target these specific elements. Now we're going to target the body element, and then we'll very briefly look at how CSS is interacting with HTML and how this all works. So I'm going to go ahead and create my anchor, and I'll just say click here in there, and we'll set the href to hash. That's all we want to do. So again, let's go ahead and just preview this. You can see that we've got a click here button, and it's there, and we've already spoken in the first video about our user agent style sheet. So we can use this as a sort of guide as what we want to override, and we'll then start to look at sort of the more advanced things we can do, and then we'll style up this button for fun. So we know that we want to set a color and a text decoration. We're not going to worry with the cursor at the moment because I'm fine with it being the hand icon, but yeah, the color we want to change, text decoration, and all sorts of things. So how do we want to first of all go ahead and change the styles of the entire page? Well, we target the body element. So this is how we interact or we apply styles to HTML elements, we go ahead and type the name of the element, and we open and close curly braces, and all of the properties go inside here. Now this is just basically standard syntax. You learn this once and you'll have the hang of doing it. There's no real special syntax in CSS. This just means target this element and apply the styles that I want to create within it to that element. So what we could do is we could technically say something like background color black. So this is a hex value for black, or more commonly shown with 6 zeros. You can also type black, for example, like this. And background color is just a single property that changes the background color of an element. So we're saying for the body, so target this body element and everything within it. So, it won't target these elements within it, but it will target the entire sort of height of the page, if you like. And it will change the background color to black. So we're giving a specific instruction, a specific value to this element. So when we go ahead and refresh, you would expect the background color to change. Now, it hasn't changed, and there's a massive fundamental reason for this. How does our page here know what styles we're setting? There's no way that it can sort of say, this page can say to itself, I look inside the CSS directory and pick out this global CSS file and apply it to the body. What we need to do is we need to tell this page with specific markup where to find the style sheet for this page. And we do this in the head of our page. Now we load the styles in the head of the page, and we load JavaScript. If you've learnt JavaScript or you are, somewhat familiar with JavaScript, we add JavaScript down here. Now the reason we do this is because if, for example, you created a page and you had lots of different elements on it, and it was quite a hefty page, had maybe a lot of text or lots of data to load in, and you had your style sheet loaded at the bottom, what that would mean is your page would look very plain until that style sheet has loaded. Now the reason we put the style sheet at the top is because the browser will look for the style sheet, load that in. Once the markup's loaded, it can then immediately apply the styles to the markup you've created. And what that does is it means that you never really, or you shouldn't ever see a flicker between plain and then nicely styled. So we do this in the head of the page for that reason. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's a link element, so we can sort of close that off. And we apply 2 attributes here. One is what it is, and in this case it's just a style sheet. And the second is the href, meaning the location. So in this case we know it's in CSS and then global.css. So we just type CSS/global.css, and that's basically loaded in our style sheet. Now, quick tip, when I refresh now, the page will go black, but a quick tip, if you look in your network tab and you refresh, you can see that this global.css file has been loaded in. This meaning the sort of root page, if you like, or the page that you're currently viewing, as shown in your URL bar, and this is what's loaded in. So we've loaded in our global.css, and now you can see that our styles that we created have been loaded in, and it even gives us the file that we're actually, the file where these styles are held, and the line number. So this is the file and the line number. So if I click on this, you can sort of takes us over, and it says, this is the element that you're looking at, and this is why these particular styles exist. Now, remember earlier we looked at cascading. So if I was to, or spoke about cascading rather, if I was to now go ahead and say background color FFF or FFFF or white, then what happens is this takes over that style. And you can see this here, and this, Element Inspector gives us a really good idea of how this is taking it over, and it sort of represents it with a line being crossed through it. So in this case, we've got background color black and then background color white. Because it's cascading, remember cascading style sheets, CSS, it's taken this over. So that means we've applied the same style to the same element. Now what happens if we were to say we want this to be HTML background color white? Well, in this case, nothing will be overridden, but the HTML of the page will be white, and the body is now black. So this starts to get a little bit more confusing. But that's where sort of specificity comes into things, but we'll just ignore that sort of for now. Later on we'll look at that. So the body of the page, we don't want to go ahead and set the background to black. That's completely useless. But what we do want to do is go ahead and use the font family property to set a font family. Now we're not going to look into fonts now because this is basically just looking at how we're interacting with the page, but we'll go ahead and just set a font of Trebuchet MS, and that's a sans serif font, so we provide a sans serif backup, and that will change the font and it looks a little bit nicer. It's a little bit more readable than Times New Roman, or for web purpose anyway. So what we now want to do is take a look at how we can target this element specifically. So we're looking at interaction between CSS and HTML. Now remember, this by default has a color of WebKit link, text decoration of underline, and a cursor of auto. And also just to point out, you can see that this has been inherited. Now we'll look at inheriting styles, later in the series, but you can see that the text within here, because we've applied the font to body, all of the fonts within our page will now inherit from body, with the exception of things like the text area element for entering large amounts of text, but again they can be styled separately. So this has been inherited, so that's why this, as well as any text that we enter here, so I could type hello there, up there, and you can see that that also has changed as well. So the text within elements will also change too. So that's why that looks like that. So we want to go ahead and now override the default styles for this button, which we've already seen here. So we'll go ahead and do that now. But the first thing we want to do is give this a class. Now we can go ahead and target elements specifically, so by their tag name if you like. So I could go ahead and say I want all anchors to be the color of blue. That's already the case, so let's go ahead and change that to yellow. Obviously you wouldn't do this because it's going to be very unreadable, but yeah, that's basically targeted all anchor elements. So however many anchor elements we create, these will all be styled as yellow. So let's revert to our one button and we'll get rid of that. We're going to go ahead and create a class of button. Now this sort of ties back into why CSS is useful and why we use it, because again, if I give this a class of button and I were to have many buttons on many different pages, that would mean that I'd only need to update these styles in order to update all of these button styles here. So we're going to go ahead and start to give the button here that we've created styles. And you can already see that the selector, now this is called a selector, has appeared here, and it tells us again global.css, and it tells us the line number as well. So it's line number 5, and that's been highlighted there for us. So we know now that we can start applying styles here, and we can override the ones. Now learning property names to style HTML elements is purely just learning them. There's no real trick to knowing what property names you should use. Again, it doesn't really matter what order you use these in, but it's generally a good idea to, just keep practicing and just learn which elements do which. And in this case, the background will change the background color. There's shorthand properties as well. So background color is a sort of singular property, but background is a combined property or a shorthand property. And the same with padding as well. For example, we might want to set the padding left, right, top or bottom, but we could also say padding top, north, east, south, west. So they're sort of the same thing but in a different way around. So learning these things comes sort of naturally with practice. But let's go ahead and start to override some of the default styles that we already see. We'll go ahead and give a background color to this. I'm going to use the RGB function to provide a red, green, blue value for this color. In this case, it's going to be 85, 188, and 142. Again, I haven't taken that off by heart. I found a color palette online and took the RGB value for it. So that gives that sort of nice green background there. And we can see that here. So let's now go ahead and just change the color property. Now all this does is it changes the text color. In this case, we're going to change this to white. Now you'll notice that in our sort of style browser here, color for the default agent user agent style sheet has been crossed out because we've provided our own value for it within this selector. So this will have been at the very top. This has now overridden. So you can always override user agent style sheet sort of values, if you like, or properties if they're listed in here. So you can go ahead and choose your own values. Let's go ahead and just finish this button up. It doesn't really matter too much if you don't understand these different properties for now, but basically this is just how we add properties to elements to sort of make that connection between HTML and CSS. So I'm going to go ahead and provide 8 pixel padding to the top and bottom and 12 pixel padding to the left and the right, and then go ahead and refresh and check the changes. Now you can see that this is sort of touching the top of the page. That's because the display property isn't set correctly. This should be an inline block. So again, we're not going to go too much into this, but it just means that it sits in line with everything else on the page, but still remains as a block element, which means we can apply values to like padding to it. If it was just in line, we can't do things like margins and things like that. Or we tend not to, but it's about learning what we can and can't do. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do is just take off the text decoration. Now this is another override. So remember, we've got a text decoration of underline in the user agent style sheet. When I refresh, you can see that that's been crossed out, and the text decoration property here, and most importantly, the underline is gone. And we can go ahead now and maybe apply something like a border bottom. So again, 3 pixels solid. Now this is a shorthand property. Well, it's not a shorthand property. Yes, it is. It's sort of a shorthand property within a shorthand property. So if I wanted to say set the border as 1 pixel solid and black, that is a shorthand property. It just means the left, the top, left, right, and bottom border I want to set to 1 pixel. Solid, so we can have things like dashed or dotted or anything like that, and I want to set that to black, so that will put a black border around it. What I can also though do is say border bottom 1 pixel solid and black, and that's again a shorthand property, because typically what we might do is say border bottom style as solid, border bottom color as black, and border bottom width as 1 pixel. Now that's really overkill, because you could have done that so much easily. As we have already seen, we can just do border bottom and then add them all in one line. It saves a lot of space and it just looks a lot better. But we don't want to do that. We want to set this to 3 pixels solid, and we want to choose a nice color again from that color palette that complements this. And in this case it's 76, 168 and 127. So if I refresh, that gives us a nice sort of flat but 3D effect. So again, we can go ahead and add something like text shadow, which we've already looked at. So text shadow, this is again a shorthand property because we provide 0, 1 pixel. This is the X and Y axis offset. So 0 from the top and 0 from the left and 1 pixel from the top. And this is 2 pixels spread. So how far the spread of the blur is pushed out. If it was 1 pixel, there'd be nothing, no spread. And RGBA is red, green, blue, and alpha. So in this case, it's 0, 0, 0. That's black. And then I'm going to put 0.2 for the alpha channel. And in that case, it gives us a nice shadow there. So that's basically how we've overridden, first of all, some of the default styles for our element, and second of all, the additional styles we add to this element to target this particular property. And we've also looked at adding a class as well. So we've made the link between the markup and the styles. We've kept them nice and separately. So if, for example, the style sheet fails to load, we just revert to the plain old markup, which is fine because, you know, that can happen sometimes, but we are separating the HTML and the CSS because it's different layers. It's the markup and then the presentational layer, which helps make the elements look like this. So we've looked at basically how we connect the two and looked at this cool button example along the way.